The wheel keeps turning and one of the most ubiquitous names in British progressive rock has returned. Except this time he's allegedly bringing back the prog rock that his core audience has been mithering him about ever since he dared to release albums that deviated from this expected trajectory. But is the overview boldly going where no one has gone before, or is this something better left hurtling towards a black hole? Guys, gals, and non-binary pals, my name is Ian, this is Rhyme Signatures, and we are once again opening the lid on the best new releases in prog, rock, and metal. Me and Stevie. Oh me, oh my, oh me and Stevie. For those of you unfamiliar with myself and the channel, I have been a long-time supporter and appreciator of Mr. Wilson's, having been following him and his efforts since the early 2000s with Porcupine Tree, and then of course his subsequent and now quite extensive solo career. The Overview is his 8th studio album and quite possibly his most anticipated one yet, given that the albums immediately prior to this one have followed a distinctly more electronica, more atmospheric and experimental route as opposed to the more distinct and recognisable progressive rock compositions of his earlier records. And the pre-release hype train was indicating that we were moving back into that kind of territory. The lead up to this album has been very interesting and quite secretive, with very minimal snippets of music being used in its promotion and no isolated sections of either song being presented as a pre-release single. It's made the Overview an intriguing and mysterious entity long before it came out. There's of course the accompanying movie, and there have been private screenings done in venues with fancy schmancy audio equipment, and the rumblings of those who were fortunate enough to have heard this months ago kept on talking about prog rock being back, and this being Stephen's greatest work in years. So, is the Overview the return to form that people have been jonesing for? Has this one song per side experience got more in common with Thick as a Brick or Ommadawn than the curiosities that were the Harmony Codex and the Future Bites? This has been a very tricky album for me, and there's no easy way for me to express my thoughts on it. Good, bad, neither. Let's peek under the hood and see if we can't break down Wilson's latest little puzzle box. Right, let's make one thing abundantly clear. I do like the Overview, and I do especially like that Stephen is clearly and without a shadow of a doubt making the music that he wants to make here. This does not feel like it is a reactionary piece to silence everyone who's been begging him for a Raven Part 2 or Grace for Drowning the sequel. The Overview stands alone amidst his discography with its own distinct flavour and identity, but still remains distinctly a piece of Wilson's in his own inimitable style. The form factor of the album and its relative brevity in terms of his own catalogue gives it a sense of singularity. There's nothing else in Stephen's arsenal that's built quite like this. The Overview consists of 2 long-form epics, the first being 23 minutes and the second 18. Now these sort of lengthier tracks are not Stephen's bread and butter. In fact, outside of Raider 2 off Grace for Drowning, there's not a single other song across his solo discography that exceeds 15 minutes in length. So to attempt an album that only consists of 2 prog epic length tracks has demonstrated that he's fully capable of writing long-form music like this, and by and large it kind of works. People will inevitably fall into one of 2 camps, those who prefer the spacier, more tripped out and electronica shorter title track, or those who prefer the more intricate and experimental Objects Outlive Us. And I have to say that I fall firmly into the camp of the latter. I just think that from the perspective of how successful this song is in setting not only the mood and atmosphere of the album's theming, but also in how interesting and thought-provoking the instrumentation is, it's a lot more successful. Special mention on the album as a whole I feel does need to be brought to Stephen's bass playing. I do feel that following up from Wilson's contribution on the lower end on the Porcupine Tree reunion album of Closure Continuation in the absence of Colin Edwin, it really gave him the push needed to explore this side of himself a lot more. The most memorable moments on the album for me are a toss-up between Wilson's bass, but also Craig Blundell's drumming. Having previously worked with Stephen on To the Bone and the Harmony Codex, it's good to hear him getting a chance to let loose a little bit here, and it certainly feels that between his contributions on the Overview, And on Steve Hackett's The Circus of the Night Whale and Frost's Life in the Wires, both from last year, Blundell's place in the prog rock history books feels most assured. But what, pray, of the mixing and the mastering, I hear you ask? Well, it's no secret that Wilson is one of the best in the modern musical landscape as far as this is concerned, and it should come as literally no surprise to anyone that the overview is as richly textured and flawlessly executed a sonic tapestry as you would expect. Every single instrument sings true and clear, every note and accent is felt perfectly with no hint of muddiness or lack of clarity. On a good pair of headphones, the album is about as close as you're going to get to actually travelling to outer space in your lifetime. It really is quite extraordinary how the record works from a purely technical perspective. There really can be no denying that Wilson is the creme de la creme of getting the best possible sound out of your own work, and honestly, if every record in the prog space could sound as full and realised as the overview does, we would be rich listeners indeed. I do enjoy the fact that the album takes some time to pay homage to some of the more nostalgic entries in Stephen's back catalogue too, with parts of the title track not feeling too dissimilar to some of the poppier moments of Porcupine Tree albums Stupid Dream or Lightbulb Sun. It's especially fun for myself as those albums mark my own entry point into Wilson's work, and it feels like a bit of a grounded homecoming for me on an album whose focus is largely on the grandiosity of outer space. Okay, let's rip the band-aid off, shall we? I feel that the overview is sadly wallowing more in negative feedback from me than it is positive, and it's proven quite difficult for me to really articulate my feelings on this, so you're going to have to just bear with me a teeny tiny little bit here as I wrestle with my own inner demons over this album. Right, let's get some personal gripes out of the way first. I do not and have never enjoyed Stephen's falsetto vocals. I do not enjoy the sound of them. I do not enjoy anything about this kind of singing from him. It is like the proverbial nails on the metaphorical blackboard. And the overview has an awful lot of this, and it comes into play almost immediately, which honestly kind of set me on edge when I first hit play. However, I am happy to admit this is personal preference, and there are likely to be a lot of people out there who either don't mind these vocals or actually quite enjoy them. Apparently there are also people who enjoy the sound of stray cats trying to kill each other at 2 o'clock in the morning as well. There's no connective tissue there, that's just an interesting unrelated fact, of course. Another point, spoken word sections in music. Can we all please just agree that this is almost universally terrible? And in the overview, the title track subjects us to Rotem Wilson reading out units of galactic measurements for far more of the song than I'm honestly happy with. If I have to hear size beyond 1 gigameter one more time, I fear I'm going to need to book myself in for a luxury spa day just to calm down. Spoken word does not grow on me with repeated listens, it just becomes aggravating. I can tolerate a couple of lines here and there to a lesser degree, but this just keeps on going, and it's nearly enough to ruin half of the album for me. But again, I digress. This is another personal gripe, and I recognise that once again some people like this kind of thing and enjoy lengthy spoken word passages during their music. In other unrelated facts, there are also people who enjoy talking out loud with their friends when watching a movie in the cinema, but you know, there we go. But okay, let's just move away a little bit from the minor little personal whinges and nitpicks. The overview frustrates me, as it feels like it is a product of numerous good ideas stitched together in an unsatisfying and ultimately frustrating manner. Some of the vocal melodies and principal through lines in both songs don't flow together well at all, feeling poorly juxtaposed against each other, and not even in a deliberately anarchic fashion, but more in a did anyone actually listen to how these parts tie together kind of fashion. I mentioned earlier in the review that Wilson's construction of 2 prog rock epics, by and large, works, and while for the most part these songs do work as singular pieces, they don't exactly nail the landing with any kind of gymnastic grace. There are times where it feels distinctly like these songs are constructed from select pieces of smaller songs and given a marginal stitching together, but with very little effort made to erase the guidelines afterwards. It feels roughshod and a little slapdash as a result, and I refuse to believe that this is an intentional thing given the grandiosity and outer spacey intention of the album's theming otherwise. Ultimately, it feels like the overview is more of an exercise in Stephen's solipsistic nature, coming across as a pretentious art project pulled from the Tate Modern, designed to make people think that they're better than you because you just don't get it, bro, rather than being a coherent or well-executed piece of music. There are flashes of greatness across the record, moments that remind me of the Wilson that I admire and still do respect, but these are unfortunately in the minority for me, with substantial swathes of the overview's tapas-style presentation of musical nuggets and ideas coming across as either annoying, the aforementioned spoken word galactic measurements in the title track, unpleasant to my ears, the filter on the closing guitar solo when objects outlive us, or just plain boring, the minimalist 3-minute outro of the title track. As an artistic statement or a marriage between audio and visual creativity, the overview is much more successful than if approached as a traditional album. But this does make it a challenging experience to appreciate, as it's not something you can just slap on in the background or enjoy on face value. In crafting the overview to be this soundtrack, this one piece of a two-piece puzzle between the audio and the visual, I feel it has diminished its overall impact by limiting and truncating the most effective way of experiencing it to be akin to having to watch it as a movie every single time. That's not how I enjoy music, that's not how I listen to albums, and the overview is a challenging piece to return to multiple times in a row as a result.
Eridanus supervoid. Supercluster complex.
So, what else can I possibly say about Stephen Wilson's The Overview? Look, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. This is what I always am on this channel. You can't buy my love, and I certainly don't bow to peer pressure to overlook things that frustrate me in the music that I listen to. And I've in truth found The Overview to be a bit of a letdown. I generally listen to an album about, 5 to 6 times before I review it. I feel by that point I have a good idea of how I feel about it, and if it's likely to be something I actively want to recommend to people or sort of, steer you away from it. I had to listen to The Overview a dozen times before I felt I could even talk about it. I kept yo-yoing in how I felt. The first listen was frustration, then it was understanding, and then confusion, elation, anger, betrayal, acceptance. The point I'm trying to make here is that The Overview is a complicated, sometimes beautiful, sometimes baffling, sometimes breathtaking mess. There's moments of some of Stephen's greatest work, which is then offset by some of the worst music he's ever written. It's a chaotic grab bag of ideas that fit together in a confusing fashion, being neither awful nor a future classic. I don't know, perhaps The Overview is a victim of its own hype. The pre-release chatter of Wilson having returned to his progressive rock roots is honestly hyperbole. There's just as much of the Future Bites and the Harmony Codex in here as there is Hand Cannot Erase and Raven. So to call this his grand return to progressive rock I think is deeply misleading, and it has honestly tarnished how I was expecting to receive this album. I don't know, maybe in a year's time I'll have finally figured this one out, but as of right now, how I'm feeling about the album in this moment, I'd just recommend streaming this one first before anything else. It's still worth your time, sure, but, make up your own mind about this one. But as for me, this is one spaceflight I think I'll stay on planet Earth for. This is all, of course, guys, just my opinion, so if you loved or hated The Overview, please talk to me about your experiences of the album in the comments down below. Please do drop me a thumbs up if you like the video, please do tell your friends about little old me, and please do consider throwing me a subscription if you've been enjoying my content so far. But until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.